Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Shifting the Business Infrastructure, Cybersecurity in a COVID-19 World, presented by Rea Associates, a top 100 regional CPA and business consulting firm with offices across Ohio. My name is Imani Fields, and I will be moderating today's presentation. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. If you have any questions during today's presentation, you may enter them into the chat box on your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the conclusion of today's presentation. However, to be respectful of your time, we know that we will not be able to get to them all. Therefore, following today's webinar, we will review all questions and send out the answers via email as soon as we can. Also, if you'd like a copy of today's slides, you will find that they're available in the handout section of the webinar dashboard on your computer screen. Today's webinar will be given by Brian Garland and Connor Mundy. Brian Garland is responsible for conducting IT risk assessments and control reviews for clients across the firm's multi-office footprint. Resourceful and determined to provide the highest quality service and advice to clients. Brian specializes in cybersecurity, IT control best practices, and disaster recovery services. At Rea, Connor Mundy works with clients to address the evolving threats to their cyberspace through risk assessment, threat assessment, and mitigation. His areas of expertise include cybersecurity, cyber forensic, and risk assessments. Today's presenters will hone in on the permanent shift to telework, the impact on cybersecurity risk, and more. And I'm going to pass it to you, Brian.
Great, thanks, Imani. Appreciate everyone that's joined our webinar today for the conversation. Again, as Imani said, we're going to focus in on this shift that we've seen in the past several months of the business infrastructure moving from the corporate office in a sense to home office as far as your employees, and just really trying to peel back the onion in terms of what does that mean for your cybersecurity controls? What does that mean for the cybersecurity risk that your organization is seeing? And give you some tips, best practices, considerations that we're seeing from that perspective. And so, just to kind of kick us off here, as far as the agenda, we're really going to be talking about, in our viewpoint, addressing the symptoms of telework, kind of amid the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've encapsulated that into just a couple bullet points for today's session. And so, kind of what I'm going to walk through here initially is just talking through the shift of where employees are working. Is it a work preference shift, working from the corporate office and moving to a home environment? Do we feel like this is a permanent shift, a temporary shift, or maybe on an ongoing basis going forward it's going to be some hybrid of that, and also to highlight some of the implications of what that would mean cybersecurity wise. And then secondly, just want to talk through again when the pandemic hit in March, there were some macro effects or some larger scale effects of what that's meant for cybersecurity and just say in general IT governance, and how businesses, small to medium-sized businesses that we're working with, how they've tried to adapt, and what the impact has been on their IT department. And like Imani said, we've got Connor Mundy as part of our Rea Cyber Services team. He's going to walk through, give kind of a threat landscape update towards the end, where we're going to focus on a couple key threats that we've identified specific to employees in telework. So kind of the remote access threats, if you will, and to give everybody on the call some considerations there. And then lastly, just give a couple best practices tips, and then a live Q&A at the end where everybody who's on the webinar can have a chance to ask any questions that they have, and we'll give some feedback. So not to say again what Imani did, but just quickly hit on introduction. So I'm Brian Garland. I'm a manager with Rea, and been with Rea for about 6 years, and I work in our cyber services division. I have a background as a CPA and a CISA. And then, like I said, we've got Connor Mundy on the call here as well. He's an IT consultant within our cyber services team, and he's going to focus on walking us through the threat landscape related to our remote access kind of threats. So jumping right into it, we wanted to kind of start today with a poll question So we should see that kind of pop up through the GoToMeeting. But really the main question here to start, do you feel that the migration to telework is a temporary or permanent shift in how your organization's employees will operate? So here we should be getting the poll results here shortly. Appreciate
Yep,
everyone.
so it looks like 27% said temporary, 73% said mixed use, and 0 said a permanent shift.
Interesting. Yeah, and from what thank you for the feedback. So just to kind of move on here, that pivots perfectly into kind of where we're going with this. And so I think there is what we've seen kind of from a macro perspective. There is a lot of benefits to the businesses that we're working with, at least, to have employees with employees enjoy the flexibility of working from home and kind of maybe organizing their schedules to fit kind of this current environment. But let's kind of walk through. I want to step back to where we were, kind of pre-pandemic, if you will, back in March, and put everything in the lens of cybersecurity risk and change management. So for everybody on the webinar, so change management is a factor that impacts obviously cybersecurity, but IT governance and management just in general. And so what are we really talking about here? We're talking about any changes to the business and their IT structure, whether it's new hardware that you're bringing in, new software updates, or new processes, procedures within IT. Change management kind of governs, okay, how are these changes initiated? How are they tested? How are they approved? Do they meet kind of the user needs and the security profile or risk appetite, if you will, of our organization? So all that to be said, putting that in the lens of where we are at pre-pandemic. So March 20th, 2020, which was a Friday, your employees were likely working in the office, working as they always have been on their corporate machines, business as usual for most of the businesses that we work with. And so what happened over that weekend on the 22nd, that's when Governor Mike DeWine for the state of Ohio issued the stay-at-home order. And so in a snapshot of a weekend, your employees were in the office and now completely working from home in a lot of cases. And so what does that mean? Again, that's change management typically, preferably, does not happen in that type of cycle. So just the speed and velocity in which this pandemic or the stay-at-home order hit is what is driving kind of the cybersecurity risk or business risk overall. And so what we saw at that point in time, and what we still see as we're kind of in the evaluation or triage state, working with a lot of our clients, is that companies were kind of forced into what we dub like an emergency change management situation. So they're implementing solutions, anything that they could get, keep their employees productive, whether it's, ramping up their remote access capabilities, VPN, or just trying to identify computers that, their employees can utilize from the home environment, or even allowing employees to use their own personal devices to work from home and try to stay productive in the lens of that. So, and to kind of put it in a blunt sense, with a lot of the companies that we work with in the small to medium-sized business space, your IT department probably went from managing 3 to 4 networks to now 300 networks, because your employees are now working from home with their own, home wireless Wi-Fi and all the devices that are connected to your home network. And so just the complexity there and the risk there, or the complexity, I guess, in a sense, is what is driving the risk from the remote perspective. And a setback. So, okay, employees are working from home. We're in this kind of hybrid environment. Why do we care? Like, what is the impact on cybersecurity? Well, I don't want to say inherently, but historically, home networks are less secure than their corporate counterparts, and I don't think that's a surprising statement to anybody on the call. But we're looking at home networks are 3.5 times more likely to have at least one malware family. Think of all the different devices that are on your home network, whether it be your kid's Xbox or your smart dishwasher, smart refrigerator, your front door camera, all of those IoT, Internet of Things devices. That's what falls in the second bullet here, as far as 25% of devices on home networks have one or more services exposed to the internet. So what does all this mean in terms of cybersecurity? It's there's more avenues for bad actors to exploit, to try to get access to your corporations, to your business's data, your business's devices, and trying to exploit that. And you have to believe that that hasn't gone unnoticed from the bad actor perspective, in terms of we have this increased attack surface that is now employees working remotely, and it's outside of the corporate confines of what historically has been the case. And so, in the good situation, maybe you have, corporate-owned devices that people have brought home. So you have your own laptops that employees are using that might have, the enterprise endpoint protection or monitoring or other controls on it. And that might be, one situation. So you at least have some visibility into what is happening on that device, but it's still on a inherently less secure network than it was before. And kind of, juxtaposed to that, certain organizations, again, with the speed and velocity in which this hit, you might have employees that have employee-owned devices that they're using. So I don't know, think about, the home PC, maybe it's a Windows 7, PC that hasn't been updated in several years, and your kids use it to download, whatever that they're utilizing. And so in a simple sense, from a corporate IT, admin perspective, there's lack of monitoring to that PC. We don't know what level of security on it. And honestly, we don't know if that device in itself is already compromised with, malware variants or what have you on the device. And so there's just increased risk as, these devices are being used to access, alter, store your business's data. So again, here we're kind of looking at what is the new normal cybersecurity. Again, with the poll question, it's I guess the feedback from the attendees is pretty consistent from what we've seen from within the work businesses that we work with, or even just kind of practitioners within the security space. What's kind of the discussion has been, but likely we're going to see a hybrid workforce, at least for the remainder of this year into 2021 for most organizations. And to kind of put some reins around that too, I thought this was an interesting way to look at it. So in the top section of this, this graph, I mean, we're some surveys that have been conducted recently. One of them pointed out, 81% of employees expect to continue to work from home at least one day per week post-pandemic. And from a fiscal perspective, again, I said I'm I have a background as a CPA, so I'm interested in this as well. But at least within the U.S., that provides some estimated savings of about $4.5 trillion per year by 2030. I mean, so if you have remote workforce, maybe you don't need the investment in the brick and mortar infrastructure that you had before. So this isn't all bad, I guess. We don't want to make this sound like a doom and gloom presentation. So that there's obviously some benefits from it, but let's kind of compare and contrast that to where the same time period, studies, projections that are being done for cybercrime and related costs. For some of the information that we were pulling, it was projecting out to see cybercrime or related costs could cost up to $90 trillion by 2030. And so why does that make sense? Why does that fit? Again, that kind of goes back to a couple of the other slides, previous slides that we were talking about. Your employees, your data, your devices are shifting to kind of a more remote workforce and a less secure environment. And so it's understandable that bad actors have noticed that, and they're going to try to exploit it, exploit the new attack surface. And so on one end, this is beneficial to some businesses from a financial perspective, but we need to keep in mind from a risk management perspective that the impacts and what this is going to have on your business's cybersecurity. So we want to kind of jump into our next poll question here. So, how quickly, given the pandemic, how quickly has your organization's budget for cybersecurity IT been restored to kind of its pre-pandemic levels?
So it looks like it says 53% budget not impacted, 41% essential resources restored, and 6% said significant reduction.
Right. Yeah. So let's bring this back to kind of where. Oh, here. Excuse me a second. Okay. So again, so what kind of put a wrapper around why we kind of posed that poll question to the group. And so really in the second section here, we want to talk about the macro effects of COVID-19 on cybersecurity. And for everyone on the webinar, I mean, let's not get too wrapped up in the graphic there. Again, I don't want to paint, our presentation as a doom and gloom, obviously, but what have we seen from a business perspective as far as this pandemic on cybersecurity? Well, the risk is here is organizations, and justifiably so, especially when especially when we were at a point where we were uncertain of what the financial and ongoing impact of the pandemic was going to be. Rewind back to obviously March, April, May timeframe. There's been an impact from an IT perspective on IT's budget, whether it be revisions, reductions in staffing in IT. So let's kind of walk this through. So maybe your organization from an internal staffing perspective, as far as like your IT leadership, maybe we saw changes in your CIO, CTO, or CISO if your organization had that. So from that perspective, I mean, that's a significant impact in terms of where your leadership is, where the IT department fits in with your business's strategic plan, where you're going. But flip it on its end on that same organization. I think we've seen in the interest of cost savings, organizations that might have been operating with a healthy level 1 support team, think of your help desk, maybe you had 3-4 individuals. Maybe the determination was made, okay, we can operate with 1 or 2 people and still satisfy the workload. Well, that impacts thinking the perspective of those help desk individuals, could have a significant impact in terms of what they have to prioritize, tickets that they're trying to resolve. Maybe it's trying to get your mobile workforce up and moving, and security isn't necessarily the number 1 focus there, because those are typically kind of the higher tier activities. Kind of keeping on with that same thought process, maybe you had a managed security service provider or an MSP that was providing a lot of your admin or IT, administrative support. Maybe you've seen a shift to a break-fix format. So all of the points that I'm hitting on in this slide is that it's what we've seen is kind of a transition as businesses have tried to determine, okay, what do we have to do? Well, what are the core services that we have to keep in place to keep moving in this environment? It's the correlation or the impact of that on IT has been moving from being strategically focused to organizations operating more from a firefighter perspective, addressing the current needs, again, i.e. trying to get your mobile workforce up and moving, your remote workforce have the availability of the resources that they need, but not necessarily thinking future minded in terms of, okay, how does this fit into my cybersecurity profile? What is the risk that I'm taking on by acting or making these decisions? So along those same lines, one of the other surveys that we pulled off is just 47% of cyber professionals have been taken off of some or all of their typical security duties to assist with other IT related tasks. So think of organizations that might have had a dedicated person that operated within the security lens within your organization, separate from that level 1 support or your other IT administrative tasks. Well, we obviously the business market is seeing duties being reallocated and those individuals being taken off of what we consider cybersecurity effects, and kind of having to take on more more holistic or more the general IT admin functions. And from a help desk perspective, what we see, and I kind of hit on this before, is if you have a reduced workforce of individuals that are trying to still service your employee base, to the standard that you're expecting, it's kind of been dubbed within our practice help desk fatigue. But your help desk staff in those cases might just be trying to, again, we're trying to get people up and working remote, and satisfying those concerns, and security can be secondary. So what's the base level of support that I can provide to keep the business moving forward without necessarily considering the long-term risks. So one of the other pieces that we wanted to hit on in terms of macro effects, and again, so this is going back to the title of the slide stated transformation, but we're really talking about as your employees have shifted from that corporate office to the remote environment, a couple other things that you're seeing is what we dub dispersion of data, or even dispersion of the devices that individuals are using. And so your data prior to the pandemic might have resided on a few core servers and databases that were strictly controlled and managed by your IT department and had proper controls. Well, now, you have employees working remote. Maybe they have this, your company data downloaded, processed, stored on their own devices, and across, like I said, the 300 to 300 networks across the expanding devices that you now have in place. And so there's just been a dispersion of data devices, and in most cases, from what we've seen, a decrease in the visibility into controls. So again, going back to what we talked about earlier, if there's devices that employee-owned devices that are being used for business purposes, I mean, right there, in a nutshell, the IT department doesn't have the same visibility into that and where their data is going and being saved and transmitted in today's environment than what they did prior. And so all of this has an impact on your risk level. And so to expand on that a little bit more, it's just so from your business's perspective, what devices are being used to access your data? How is it being altered, transmitted, stored? And again, especially when employees are using their own personal devices. So now that we've kind of walked through, the macro effects and tried to lay the groundwork of kind of where we're at, I wanted to give everybody on the webinar a thought process of, hey, okay, if we're transitioning back to the office, or maybe even more bluntly put it as, what are some of the next steps that we need to think about moving forward? So for organizations that have employees transitioning back to the office, really kind of the best practices that we've been sharing, and that individuals such as us and as security practitioners in our field have been talking about is, you can't necessarily take the laptop that, say, the employee had at their home, they come back into the office, plug into the network and go. It's not as simple as that. Those devices, again, just going back to the slide about the lack of visibility that we've had in these environments, there is risk there. And so kind of the best practices, we've even seen certain literature that we look at recommends setting up a separate network from your main corporate network that can serve as kind of a triage. So triage/cleansing of the devices. What does that mean? I mean, that's kind of wordy. What does it mean? It means, what are the patch levels for those machines that we're bringing back? Are they up to date as far as patches, or have they been scanned to make sure there isn't any malware or other, unwanted software, or even software that's been installed by the employee to work with their own home devices that might, not fit into the, approved software for the corporate environment. So there's kind of a cleansing of those devices that should be considered. Secondly, especially in environments where employees have used their own computers, there is a risk factor in terms of, data has left the environment as employees have worked from home in this remote, kind of sense, and has our data been recovered, and is it back within the confines of our environment and controls? And so we talked internally about, is there some type of employee certification to say, okay, you're bringing these devices back, or you're coming back into the home office, you need to certify that there's no corporate data still residing on your own PC, or that has everything that you have taken off site to do your job been returned back to the confines of our environment. And then lastly here, just want to hit on, I think this is a pretty valid point, is don't neglect the on-premise devices. So don't neglect the PCs that have been sitting in your office this whole time. You still need to make sure from an IT perspective that those are updated, that those fit within the security profile of your organization. We don't want to treat like the devices at your main office as like a trusted zone, if you will, and then everything that's been remote is the untrusted or the risky area. I mean, you have to take a holistic approach to make sure that we're kind of looking at everything within the scope of the company. So one more poll question here. So when the state mandated shutdown occurred, how effective was your incident response plan or business continuity plan if implemented?
All right, it looks like 26% says we don't have an IRP or BCP in place. 33% says plan effectiveness was limited, and 40% said plan functioned as expected and provided us valuable feedback.
No, great. Yeah, those are interesting results. Again, appreciate everyone participating in the poll question. So I just wanted to put this in the perspective. I mean, we're talking about an IRP or a BCP, and we're with this presentation, we're talking about a pandemic and COVID-19 and the uniqueness of that. But really, the goal of any IRP or a BCP is that we could take COVID-19 and replace that event with, say, a flood or a fire or a tornado. I mean, we're really talking about just significant events that are impacting your organization, and do you have tested plans in place on how to respond? And so with about half of the attendees saying that your BCP or IRP functioned as expected and was beneficial, that's great to hear. And I would encourage those where it might not have hit all the boxes, or if one needs drafted in the first place, that I would have to imagine that the last couple of months have probably been pretty eye-opening from that perspective, and give you definitely some impetus to draft a similar type of plan. Because I mean, it goes without saying, but you don't want to be mid-crisis or mid-pandemic and trying to develop these policies and procedures. It's much easier to flush those out and test ahead of time. So thank you for that feedback. Kind of transitioning here into, again, the threat landscape piece that Connor's going to hit. We actually have one additional poll question that we want to hit with the group. So from an IT risk management perspective, has your organization gone through a risk assessment in the past year? And if so, did it include a review of the remote access policies, procedures?
All right, so 49% said yes, 40% said no, and 12% said yes, but with remote access policies and procedures.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I guess with that, Connor Mundy's going to take over and walk through this piece. Yeah, Connor, you can factor in the poll question into what you're talking about, but it's all you.
All right, sounds great. I just want to start by saying thank you, everybody, for joining. I know it's crazy time right now, but I just really appreciate you giving the time and to come out and listen to us. So I want to start with we shift to telework, and so do the cyber criminals. They got to find out what works for them to get in. They're trying to get in. They're trying to do bad things. So let's talk about the big three that we're seeing right now: phishing, social engineering, and brute force. And we talk about the blast in the past, that's more the brute force, but let's talk phishing first. So phishing, I think I like to just explain it this way. Just take off the PH and put it F. It's phishing, all right? So you're taking the cyber criminal is like going to the lake, and they got their phishing rod, which is their tool, their hacking tool. And then they have the bait, which it could be an email, it could be a message, it could be anything. And what they'll do is they'll throw out the rod, and they're going to have the bait on the rod in the lake, and they're trying to get any fish to try to grab it. So when you think about it in your organization, they're going to send out an email to everybody, and they're just trying to get one person to click maybe a link and to go to a website, or maybe click a calendar invite, maybe click onto a file and download it. And once they do that, their malicious code is installed into your organization. So that's kind of like a phishing attack. And we go to the social engineering. That's more a cyber criminals trying to build a profile around maybe an individual in an organization. So they'll look at your Facebook. They'll look at any kind of information they can find on the internet about you. They'll try to find your dog's name. They'll try to find your grandparents' name, just all this information. And they'll use this information to either act as you, to talk to maybe someone higher in the organization about trying to get confidential business operation plans, for example, or they'll use it to maybe try to hack your password, which would be like, maybe your password's like your dog with like 123. So they'll look up, oh, your dog's name's Freddie. So they'll try Freddie 123 and they're in, stuff like that, crazy stuff. And then the next one is brute force attacks. So with the shift to telework, a lot of help desks have had way too many tickets, like we've talked about earlier, that fatigue. So a lot of protocols that have in place, such as multi-factor authentication or, account lockout. So we'll start with multi-factor authentication, called MFA. So what will happen is if you use the traditional username and password to log onto your account to get into critical, softwares, it would also prompt for a code to be sent to maybe a cell phone or a phone call. You'll get a phone call with a code, and then you have to plug in that code into the software and then get in. But what we've been seeing with a lot of clients is that with the help desk fatigue happening, is that they're just deciding, we're going to just turn it off right now because of COVID. We're going to turn that off, and then also the lockouts, which would be like if you put your password in 3 times wrong, it would lock your account, and then help desk has to unlock it. So they're really just throwing those protocols out the window just because they can't really focus on that right now. They have bigger fish to fry. So with those disabled, now you're talking cyber criminals can use tools that will just plug in passwords constantly, just random passwords until they get the right one and get in. It's like using different keys and you're at your house and you don't know which key it is and you have all the keys in your hand and you're like, which one is it? They just take different ones. They're just trying it. And that's kind of the idea about it. So next slide here. So these are 2 things I found on the internet, which I was like, wow. So the FBI, they have a cyber criminal complaint hotline you can call in. If you're like an organization, you can just kind of send it to them so they know. They can give you feedback. So before COVID, you're looking at 1,000 a day was kind of normal, which is still a lot, But now with COVID, they've seen the numbers going from 1,000 to over 4,000 a day. It's insane. And then the next one, so since February, Barracuda Networks, they do, switches, routers, network equipment. They've seen 600% up in phishing attacks, which is a crazy number to think about. Just to explain, phishing attacks and, fake websites. So if we look at the left here and you see, cyber criminals aren't dumb. They're going to think, let's use emotion to, try to get people to click on links. CDC, an easy one. Let's make a fake CDC account. Let's give this email saying about like the numbers of cases, and then, there's a web link there, and most people they'll think it's like, oh, it's a CDC. They got logos on it. It looks kind of legit, so I'm going to click it. You click it, they're in. You did exactly what what you want them to do. And then to the right, we got an example of like a fake website. So it's like a fake, for example, it's like a fake COVID, showing like the numbers, and it could have maybe links to download, maybe a dashboard to have on your computer. And again, same thing. They're just trying to get you onto the site, and then they're trying to get you to download something, and just to get their malicious code onto your device. So a good example of brute force was actually a client I've seen that I was working with, and I focused on the Office 365 environment. That's one of my focuses, and we saw, it was eye-opening to say the least. So I use my tools. I'm on the network. I use my tools. And, I'm going through the report and I go to the user accounts and I do a quick search. And then just that day when I was on the devices, when I was on the network, I pulled up a list of user failouts. I just want to see like how people were failing out, and people were like putting their password in wrong, and to see if there's any protocols in place, such as, lockout after 5 or MFA enabled. So I look, and on to the right, if you look on the right of the screen, this is an example for one of the clients I was working with. And, there's 270 users that popped up for failed logins for that day of like, I think it was about 1,000 in the company. And, the first one that I see was actually, I looked at the org chart. I was like, this is a pretty high up person. This is like, pretty high up in their organization. And, I see that it has 1.8 thousand failouts for that day. And I'm like, whoa, this is, so I told right away, I got involved in the IT department. We went ahead and actually enabled multi-factor authentication for the company. So just to help with, making sure these bad actors can't just keep plugging in passwords. But if you think about that 1.8K, that's a number, it's 1,800. You're like, oh, okay, that's whatever. That's one day. But think about that in a week, in a month, in 6 months. Like, if there's no one watching, they can just keep going until they get the password right and get into your system. And when you think about, again, with, you got these cyber security professionals that are working for organizations that are having to do other tasks, such as setting up computers to send out to people that are remote, trying to help with like lockouts of accounts, and they're doing all those other help desk tier 1 IT functions. No one's watching this. This could go on forever until these bad actors get in. So I mean, it's something really to look at, and make sure that your IT department has MFA enabled, has lockouts enabled, just so you can't let these people just keep adding passwords into the accounts. All right, ready for a poll question here. So this is kind of asking like who uses cloud applications in their environment for critical services. So an example, like Office 365 is very popular, and then Google G Suite also has a solution.
All right, so we have 20% cloud applications not utilized, 39% cloud applications used for a limited portion of IT services, and 41% said significant dependency on cloud-based apps.
So yeah, a large portion of the audience right now, you guys use cloud solutions, and it is the future. I mean, it's cheaper, it's more reliable, it's easy for the telework, it's easier. It makes everything more easy. So let's think about this. Let's go 2 big ones that with Office 365. I mean, it's the most prevalent we've seen with clients, and then also in the industry. It's right now, it's the leader. So phishing attacks around Office 365 accounts. Boom. First one, you need to watch out when you get from external parties, if you get like calendar invites. So sometimes it'll pop up in their little text file, like little files that will be on the top of your Outlook. Make sure or even be able to, if you have scanning abilities, to scan the file to make sure it has no malicious code in it. Because a lot of these could be easily just, you click that, you think it's just an Outlook invite, but it actually has malicious code behind it. So that's an easy way. That's a quick one. The next one, fake account update web links. So when you log in, because a lot of you guys have used, like you said, use cloud critical, for your critical applications. When you log in, it asks for like the classic username and password. But what cyber criminals have found is they're going to make a fake like Microsoft account and email to you, and then email you saying like, you need to switch your password. So then there'll be a link. You click the link and it pops up, and it looks very similar to the Office 365 portal login with like, just put your username, put your password. But really, it's fake. So when you put your username and password in, it's actually just getting logged by them, and they can actually you just gave them your credentials. That's another one. And then say, for an example, that happened to someone in your organization. They put in their username and their password. Now, the next one, the fake conversation with a legit user, they're going to go into the account and say they'll use it and be like, hey, I'm going to use Skype right now. And Skype message someone in financial services for the organization and be like, hey, can I get the financial statement for the year? And just Skype it to me. And, you know, you may sit there and be like, well, it's on Skype, it seems legit, and you just send it to them. But that's where you need to think is in this current time and day and age, you should be like, give them a call and be like, make sure, be like, hey, did you really just Skype me and ask me, like, did you really want this to report right now, like this way, or do you want me to send a different way? Just make sure when it comes to really, you know, critical organization documents, and to make sure you're like, give them a call and just be like, is this really like how you want me to send it? Or you want me to send it more securely? That's just an example. And then the next part, this is more for your IT professionals on the call. So if you're setting up like Office 365 environment, first one, you know, be aware of brute force attacks like we showed earlier. Make sure you have MFA and some user lockouts enabled. It's very important. The next one, email forwarding threats. So don't allow for people to forward their work email to maybe an external Gmail or an iCloud account. That's just a way just to really, that data that gets sent to those accounts are really out and they're vulnerable and you really can't get them back. And the next one is mobile device accessing. So with Office 365, it gives you the ability to use, you know, at-home devices such as an iPad, such as an iPhone, or, you know, your family computer to get into your network and get critical services. Make sure you have mobile device management enabled, which is a service that you get with Office 365 already when you pay for it. And that just helps with making sure, you know, whoever's logging on is actually the one you want logging on, not just like anybody. So some home threats real quick. So first one, peer-to-peer collaboration with Unsecured Solutions. So this is an example, you know, those free Google accounts that allow you to share, you know, files or a Dropbox. Let's just not use them right now. I think when it comes to your organization's data, do not put anything onto those unsecure servers, and also don't transfer it that way. Use other options. You can email them with your email, but just stay away from those because they're unsecure, and you really don't know when you put when you put that data on there, you don't know if they're even compromised on their end. That, you know, that's software. The next one, again, when it comes back to like accessing your, you know, cloud solutions through your personal devices, make sure that, you know, you're using your phone is up to date. You're not using old software. You know, make sure that when it comes to you know, like critical data, make sure you're doing it safely. And then the third one, I would say, you know, a big thing is when you're in the office, you may print out documents with financial or, you know, personal data on it, and you might just have in the office and it's safe, secure. When you go to dispose it, you know, you can go into Shredder. Your company might have a service behind it to just get rid of the data, the paper in a good fashion. But when you're at home, you know, it's not the same case. So just be aware of that and maybe not print out as much stuff. Keep it on the device itself, because you don't want to throw stuff away and then it gets in the wrong hands, you know, we don't want that. So again, we talked about earlier about, you know, your network at home. You know, it's most likely not the most secure. Let's just be honest here. You know, you start with, you got your IoT devices, you have a corporate computer, if you have it from work, with, you know, on the same network as your gaming computer, I mean, your gaming systems that your kids are playing on, or that, you know, smart fridge that's telling you when you need it, you know, your ice is ready. I mean, there's stuff like that. It's just all on the same network. And a lot of these devices, such as the IoT devices, don't have the security protocols in place to protect, you know, your network, because a bad actor can use that and get into the network. And also when you talk about, you know, your network itself at home, you got a router that you bought from Best Buy, and, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of security features like a firewall or, you know, segmentation of the network, so you don't have like a network, like a regular network or a guest network. You don't have these things really enabled off the jump. And without those in place, it's really, you're running in a vulnerable state in your network. And again, this is an example. What I'm saying is just, it's not a corporate network. You know, you got your smart TV, you got your Blu-ray player, you got your gaming consoles, all connected to the same network and all accessing the same network. So it's a bit concerning.
Okay, great, Connor. Yeah, so I just want to pick up, you know, we want to kind of wrap this all up in the bubble. I know we've talked about a lot of threats. We've talked about kind of where the environment has shifted from where we were in March to where we are now, and just want to give recommendations to the folks still on the webinar here, and it's great with the poll question to hear that it sounds about 50% of the attendees have kind of run through their risk assessment and incorporated in components within that of remote access. I would encourage those that have not to either incorporate remote access piece or try to anytime there's significant change in the IT environment, that should factor into what is the impact from a risk assessment standpoint. And so kind of first bullet point here is just perform that risk assessment with the focus on remote access. And if it's your first time running through, if you've never done it, the unknowns far exceed the knowns in the first go through. And so that more than anything else, honestly, from a strategic perspective, what do you need to focus on? What are your biggest risk areas? The risk assessment is a key process document to go through. Secondly, here is just really working kind of if we're talking about IT in a maturity scale, I mean, it starts with the risk assessment, but really having an IT security framework in place with controls tied to your organization's business objectives. I mean, this is key. A security framework, gives you peace of mind, in a sense that you at least have that you've assessed your key security areas and you have controls to try to mitigate that risk to whatever your business's acceptable level is, and that's not going to be consistent across companies or across industries. And so that is a secondary kind of a more mature environment look. And then again, the third one here, establish formal policies and controls tied to the goals of the business. So it's one thing to have the security framework in place, but really the meat of a security infrastructure for business comes through the form of policies that your employees are aware of, they're utilizing, and that just helps keep your risk management process documented in line and in line with your expectations as the business owner or that of the boards. So I want to hit on a couple pieces here at the end. So for everybody on the webinar, I just have some free resources, no cost to you, no additional steps needed by you in terms of free resources for the listeners. So the first one, Connor kind of hit on some of the analysis that he does from an Office 365 review. So, looking at your user activity, that kind of brute force look, multi-factor authentication. I mean, to be honest, there's more to that review than we want to necessarily mention here, but just given the current environment and the preponderance of our client base, at least, that has transitioned to a Microsoft 365 environment, this is one of the hottest, attack surfaces and one of the hottest, or most significant threat areas. And so, kind of we're offering as Rea Cyber Services kind of a free assessment of where you're at in your Office 365 tenant, what controls you have in place, and how that aligns with what we see as best practice. Can almost give you a gap kind of assessment there. And then secondarily, a cybersecurity self-assessment survey. And so we have a survey that's built that can kind of give you, I should know that, I mean, it's probably a series of like 45 to 50 questions of really yes or no. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but just to give you feedback on where you're at. And, for the questions that you answer no to, a very, easy report that we can provide to you to say, here's the risk, here's where it kind of falls on a heat map for your organization, and it can give you at least a preliminary gap analysis compared to, the main cybersecurity industry standards that are out there. And then lastly here, there's a few partnerships that Rea has or resources available that for everybody on the call that we're more than happy, to work with you and provide guidance where possible. So with that, I kind of want to open up the floor, to questions that have come in during the webinar. Connor and I are here to help with anything.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have a few questions here, and if you guys have any more questions, feel free to submit those in as we're reading these off. But the first one we have here is, how extensive is a risk assessment, and how do I learn more about a risk assessment for my company?
Yeah, so a risk assessment, and for us personally, I don't want to get into the technical jargon, but we utilize what I would say is probably the industry leader as far as the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so within NIST, there are what they call domains, but it's looking at all across the board, in terms of how do you, what's your governance process, what are your policies and procedures over IT? How do you grant access to users, remove users? What is your disaster recovery planning? How are you monitoring your IT devices? I mean, it's a pretty extensive review from a risk assessment standpoint. And again, at least with our approach and how we work with it with each business, each entity has their own intent in terms of where they want to be on the maturity scale. So there's the high end players that want to be at it's a scale of 1 to 4 essentially, that want to be at that 4. Honestly, for the businesses that we work at, most are not trying to achieve a 4. Most are trying to be kind of at that mid level, like a 2 or 2 to 3 time frame. And so it all fits into what your business's risk appetite is, and obviously varies based upon what industry that you're in, whether or not you have your healthcare, and there's other compliance requirements that are involved. So, but in terms of the framework that we use for all of our risk assessments, I mean, it's pretty wide reaching, all from governance down to technical controls, back to your policies and procedures and everything in between. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Brian. The next question we have here is, if we do a risk assessment, does this really help us prevent threats, or is it another report to put on the shelf? We have had them done in the past, and they don't offer us ways to get better. They just tell us what we aren't doing.
No, that's a great call out. And so, absolutely. I mean, a risk assessment is only as good as the actionable items that come out of it. And so, at least for us, immediately, even during the risk assessment, I mean, if there's anything that we dub, hot, sharp, and dangerous within the environment, we're obviously looking to change that, at the point in time that it's identified. But the goal and intent, and honestly, with a lot of the clients that we work with, the risk assessment is coupled with kind of what I mentioned in the one of the previous slides is a security plan build out. And so, yes, we've done this risk assessment. We've identified, where our gaps are from where we want to be as an organization. And so that's really building out, okay, what are the controls and how are we going to handle this on an ongoing basis? And i.e. that turns into what is our security plan? And so a lot of organizations, and I'll be frank, and you hit the nail on the head with the question, is it's the easier part to do the risk assessment and get the current state. It's hard to push through that organizational change, which comes in the form of those actual policies and procedures and that ongoing security framework that needs to be in place to address. And so honestly, you're directly on, but it comes in the form of those policies and procedures. And organizational change is not easy, but at the same point in time, you need to understand where you're at the first place. What is your current state and where you want to be before you really have the basis to move forward with change and the policies that you need to have in place. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. The next question we have is, if we do not have IT staff, does your consulting team provide these types of virtual services?
Yeah, absolutely. So within our Rea Cyber Services division, obviously we have a team that does kind of the IT governance piece, which is this risk assessment. We have another group that fits the mold of that managed security services provider, or just a managed services provider. So definitely for those organizations, again, with Rea and the footprint that we have across the state of Ohio, I mean, we work with businesses of all sizes, and so we definitely go into those environments where it's understandably so, for years it's been maybe the lead accountant or the CFO that's trying to be the head of HR and the head of IT and head janitor, what have you. So in those situations, obviously we're here to help, and it's important to be able to acknowledge as a business. I'll be honest. I communicate this message when we work with organizations that have boards, that you need to understand where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. And if you don't have the technical expertise on staff from a cybersecurity perspective, it is a significant risk. And so being able to acknowledge that and bring in resources where you need it's important. It can be very, very value added.
Awesome. And the next question we have here is, we are seeing a lot of activity from emails that are fake. Is this something everyone is seeing?
Can you, sorry, Amanda, can you say, is it what emails that are safe?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot more activity from emails that are fake. Is this something that everyone is seeing?
Oh, fake. Okay, sorry, I was hearing it as safe.
No worries.
Yeah, to be honest, I would jump back to one of the slides that Connor was talking about earlier. And Connor, feel free to jump in. I don't want to speak for you, but where we've seen definitely a significant increase in the number of threats in this current environment. Again, pointing back to the that FBI report that we mentioned, or the Barracuda Networks report. I mean, the threat activity or that activity has definitely increased since March. And it's these bad actors are operating honestly like any other business model would. They see the opportunity, they see the risks, and they're trying to capitalize on it. And so yeah, that has been a consistent theme, I would say, across the client base that we have been working with.
Great. And the final question we have today, and like I said, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to reach out to Brian or Connor, but it's, we are remote and worried about on-site vendors. Can this work be done remote?
So if I'm understanding the question right, you're talking about vendors, your IT support vendors that are coming on site to do work. I mean, maybe can you say the question again, Amani, for me, please?
Sure. So it sounds like they're saying they're remote and worried about people coming on site. Can these risk assessments or things that you guys offer be done remote?
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. So there, I guess with that in mind, obviously the pieces that we wouldn't be able to necessarily look at from, typically in an on-site review, you'd be doing kind of a observation of the environment, looking at physical access type of controls, i.e. who can get into the server room, who can get to areas where there'd be confidential data or the risk of that. But with that in mind, I mean, there's significant other components of the risk assessment that can be done that that provide a lot of value. That and we're seeing this too, that for companies that are concerned about and justifiably so in the current environment. So there's just certain aspects, mainly like the physical access controls and some of the evidence that we get through observation, just kind of walking around and observing how employees that are in the office are acting, and where data, if there's papers on desks and things like that. But yeah, there's definitely some value in just a virtual only assessment.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on shifting the business infrastructure, cybersecurity in a COVID-19 world. We hope the team was able to provide you with some valuable insight in regards to best practices and potential solutions. If you sign off today and realize you have additional questions, like I said, you're always welcome to reach out to Brian and Connor directly, or reach out to us at reacpa.com. Thank you for joining us again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.